with another Warframe video. So, I had to deal with some audio issues due to a new Windows update, and now they've actually patched in these Saren changes before I could do an overview of the workshop. So, let's just talk about them directly. I do think it's a pretty significant nerf to Saren, and it moves her away from the style of gameplay I like. But she's probably still pretty good overall, especially her ability to be abused will not degrade too much, I think, right? So that's kind of the standard with these changes, trying to fix community abuse that don't really succeed, typically speaking, but it's not too surprising in a complicated game where there's synergies between different characters. Quick note, if you hear any weird sounds in the background, there's construction going on right next door to me, so I can't really do much about it, so I'm sorry if that does come through. Anyhow, so the overall change is now you lose the Spore detonation, which I think is unfortunate because people hugely overrated that, and that was most of the community dislike was from people not realizing that it was closer to dealing like 8 times your current Spore damage to enemies and to infected enemies in practice in a lot of situations. But it was situational, and then it's been replaced with just maintaining your stacks and stacking harder, and your stack buildup will be decreased massively instead. At least it depends on the mission a little bit, right? So, okay. This wording is a little bit confusing. Recasting on enemies. Okay, they fixed this from the workshop. Originally, they said you could recast on infected enemies to infect them, and that's a little, you know, I mean, why would I care about reinfecting infected enemies, right? That's a bit ridiculous. This sounds like you can just reinfect uninfected enemies to keep your combo going, as it were, with the spores at a 20% decrease to its damage. Now, I'm going to assume, charitably, that they're doing the sane, nice thing for us and always making these percentile decreases a percentile of current damage, so that you have this, like, the first couple ticks are really hurting you, and as your current damage decreases, it's gonna take a while to actually wind down to 0, right? So like 10%, it's gonna say like, we have 10% per second decrease to your spores while spore damage that you racked up so far when there are no spores on any enemies. So I'm assuming that's each time 10% of current. So, you know, if you have 1,000, you go down to 900, and then you go down to 810, and so on, right? So it's a little bit less bad each time it further decreases. If it's like take snapshots, I'm assuming it doesn't snapshot your amount that you're at and ticks it down to 0 in a very short order. Anyway, it's probably the case. I haven't gone in game to test it yet. So inconsistent spore ranges. So they went over this in more detail in the workshop. It seems like they confirmed that people feeling that spore spread range was inconsistent was purely due to the fact that if enemies die and they spread spores in that way, they would spread at half range. And that seems to be it. They did say, here, let me move over to the dev workshop here. They said, what did they say here? That was just bullshit. Inconsistent spread ranging. So we looked at the seemingly inconsistent spreading nature of spores. After rummaging around in the code for an answer, we discovered an unintended mechanic, bullshit, that determined range based on specific action taken. We'll call it spread condition. So if we look at this table down here, they're saying that it was unintended that killing an enemy, or when an ally kills an enemy, or when the spore's tick damage kills an enemy, that it would spread at 8 meters. Now that is not true. This change was made by DE intentionally. It's in their patch notes, and it was requested by the community after Saryn's previous rework. So I don't know what the fuck they're on about with that. Maybe they just forgot about it. I don't know. But anyway, it was an intentional change, and it appears to be that was what was confusing people entirely. That plus probably enemy spawn in, which is what I thought it was all along. Still, there's maybe something else will turn up, but I would be pretty surprised if that's the case. So, if the spores kill an enemy, it no longer spreads, but if you or your allies kill an enemy, the spores will spread at their base range, right? Or at their base range plus modified by range mods, right? They'll spread at their full range. That's a better way to put it. A more correct way to put it. And that's why I think she will still be a good team frame to abuse, and this is mostly going to be a solo nerf. And that's because, you know, currently, before this patch, you could kind of play very defensively while spreading spores, and you'll still be able to after this, but it's going to be a little more difficult, I think, to do, and your damage won't ramp up as quickly, because what you're going to have to do is, you have to use like melee block in order to survive, because Saren isn't actually that tanky in practical terms without multiple arcane guardians. And you'll be able to, like what I was doing was using the Sarpa to block and then fire into enemies at range to spread spores. And now this is going to be a little bit more difficult to do. You're going to have to actually recast spores occasionally. You're going to lose some of your damage stacks when doing that, and your damage won't stack as high. In practical terms, I think you're actually going to lose damage for the most part, just lose a ton of damage, because even losing all of your stacks before this change wasn't as big of a deal, because in most circumstances, you're probably going to be, before this patch, stacking damage 3 times as fast. But in lower density missions after this patch, on certain builds, so a lot of qualifiers there, but in those situations, you will be able to stack damage faster than previously. So we'll get into that in a second here. So yeah, let's see. I think that just gets us to the damage growth, right? It used to be determined per spore. So if you have 30 enemies infected before this patch, we're going to assume you have 3 spores on all of them, because you're actually spraying enemies with a automatic weapon of some kind, or a burst fire weapon or whatever. You're going to have about 90 spores between 30 enemies, and they'll deal 90 damage instances per second, and your damage will increase by 90 per second, right? So that's pretty good. That's very fast. Now it's per enemy. So if you have 1 enemy, for each enemy previously, you would get 3 ticks of damage and 3 ticks of increasing damage per second. Now it's 1 tick, 1 damage increase per second. And what was the word I'm looking for here? So you can only get up to 10 enemies infected for purposes of damage increase. You can still infect an unlimited number of enemies for purposes of dealing damage, but only the first 10 count for damage going up. But it's 2 damage per enemy. So this is, 33% less effective than, or that's not actually quite how it works, is it? It's yeah, fuck, I don't want to break out a calculator. It's less effective than previously by, but it's 2 damage instead of 3 damage increase per second, okay, baseline. However, it's affected by power strength now. So if you go below 100% power strength, your build is going to suck. I'm not sure if it caps out at 1 per second, probably does. And if you go above 100% power strength to 200% power strength, you can get 4 damage per enemy, right? So that's what I mean. If you had 10 enemies infected previously, you would get an increase of 30 damage per second. Now, with 200% power strength, you can get an increase of, 40 damage per second. So it potentially can be better for a small number of enemies. However, if you're doing high density missions, a lot of defense missions and a lot of Elite Sanctuary Onslaught, in defense missions where the enemy density is actually good, so many defense missions, but not all of them, you can expect more like 20 targets in a round. That's what I was getting on like Hydron and stuff. For Elite Sanctuary Onslaught, closer to 30 targets in a round is more, the standard. However, on shittier missions, this will be advantageous to you for the most part. Yeah, I think it is just pretty much overall advantageous. The only downside is, of course, building for power strength is very difficult, and they've made duration more important on her. So now, previously, power strength didn't really matter, duration didn't really matter. Now, power strength and duration matter a lot, and range is just as important as ever for Saren to be useful. So, if anything, it's really more of a case of her being more energy greedy, and you needing to invest more Forma in her, and maybe more Arcanes in her, and have, she's basically more of a, I don't know, advanced player frame than she was before, even before the both reworks that just happened, because I would say her power level is going to increase substantially if you can throw in like an Arcane Energize, if you have Zeneric maxed out, if you can afford energy pizzas to use all the time, and if you have those like maxed mods like Max Blind Rage and like the ability to put 6 Forma on a frame. So she's just kind of gotten harder and harder to use, I think. Well, previous update, she was easier to use than before, and now she's even harder to use than before, in my opinion, to her maximum effectiveness. I think it's a little bit more important to her than it was before that she have really good energy availability and stuff because of the changes. Okay, so the upside is you can stack damage over time. You have this damage decay mechanic. You don't lose all of it when all of your spores are gone. If you kill all the infected enemies, then, and there are no more infected enemies left, you lose 20% of your current damage, I assume, and then lose 10% of your current damage per second. It says it scales with power strength. I'm really hoping that means that more power strength makes it not wreck your shit as hard, instead of it being like 20% per second if you have 200% power strength, because that would suck dick. Nullifying effects increase the decay by 30% per second. I hope that means 230% per second and not by, as in up is increasing it to 40% per second total. Seems excessively high. I wonder how many ticks you get of that going through a conduit, because that could really kind of, if it's low enough, then she'll still be good in Elite Sanctuary Onslaught. But if it's high enough, then she'll be shit in Elite Sanctuary Onslaught, because she won't be able to continually stack damage, you know, even slowly as you go through the rounds. Instead, she'll just kind of get up to a sort of a plateau and just have her damage stripped off every round. And that would kind of suck. So, but the fact that it's slowly stripped it's a little shitty. I don't know. But it's not too bad. I think I'm gonna have to try it in ESO and on some defense missions and see if this really benefits you a lot. Because, like, in theory, possibly if the drain isn't so bad, it's gonna benefit you overall, right? Because you'll be able to stack up that damage continuously that would be reset between rounds. Of course, if your building damage stacks 1/3 as quickly, it will take some time for you to ramp up. She's a little bit more like Nidus, I think, in that regard now. Yeah. Now, one thing I will note is a lot of people were complaining about her not being good enough in lower level missions. I don't really think this is a legitimate problem, because lower level missions are so fucking easy, and the majority of frames are not very effective in them. Because, like, let's say you bring Loki and you go invisible. How is that helping you in a low level mission? You're immune to all the damage that's going to be present in that mission anyway. You're one-shotting everything anyway. It's not fucking helping you. And that's the case for a lot of frames, and that's how it is for Saren right now. Her ultimate can be used to clear out low level missions pretty effectively. Her other abilities are kind of pointless. Okay, whatever. This doesn't really do anything to help her in those missions. Your spores are just going to insta-kill everything, and then they won't spread out because they've killed the enemies themselves. And you'll lose all your damage over and over again. And so you'll never really be able to build up any damage ticks, even with the new decay mechanic. But whatever, you're still going to be trashing those missions, no problem. In Sortie 3s, in ESO, in Fissures, Endless Fissures, you're probably not going to have a lot of problems. But I think the key takeaway here is you really want to bring a team comp with Saren now more than before, because I think she really has the possibility to be very effective, as effective as she was before, you know, in Saren 2.0 version. Let's call this 3.5. We had 3.0, we had 2.0. She probably has the ability now as 3.5 to be even more effective than when she was 2.0 still, provided you bring a good team with her, because of the change now where if an ally kills an enemy who's spore infected, they will spread spores at full range. And that means you can build 200% power strength and maybe like a little over 200% range, and you can bring like a self-damage trinity or some kind of frame that like has a really high reach and can kind of like spread out and kill enemies outwards from your like closest to farthest out enemies. Maybe not in a whole wave like Equinox, but there's probably a few different options where those frames previously wouldn't have had very good synergy with Saren. I think now they have very good synergy with Saren, because they will spread her spores out extremely far. And when those spores ripple out, kill all the enemies out really far away, right? And then you have no enemies infected. Well, you wait for a spawn in, you infect one guy, shoot him, everyone's infected again, and then you just restart this cycle of Saren giving some other long-range frame extremely long reach, because when they kill infected enemies at their maximum range, those spores will then spread at maximum range and make sure that any other enemies in the map get infected and then killed off. So yeah, I think she's better in a party, significantly worse solo. I don't like the changes overall. Just like my gut feeling is I'm gonna dislike them, because not having enemies spread on Spore Death kinda it's irritating. It's like an annoyance, right? That before they changed that on her previous rework for Saren 2.0, it was just a huge quality of life like hassle, right? And then we're bringing that back. We're bringing that hassle back. I think it's going to annoy the hell out of me. But her power level probably isn't super different for group missions, but worse, definitely worse. Just not like, you know, monumentally worse. It's just a big nerf. With a slight quality of life decrease to boot, but she was so strong, she's probably still pretty good, right? I think that's the takeaway. For other changes, enemies don't block melee attacks anymore. They changed some stuff for controllers to improve the new controller controls. I've heard from a few people that they're shit. I use mouse and keyboard. For Warframe, can't stand it on controller. Tried, just can't handle it. I didn't really look through all these fixes, but you know what? I'm not gonna do a talk on the fixes. I just want to talk about Saren. So, like I said, I will try and get a rework, rework overview out tonight or tomorrow morning, and then I'll work on an actual guide to her, which might take more forma now, because I want to say like snapshotting damage with what's it called, energy conversion is probably the optimal build on her now, because if you can energy conversion and then like spore an enemy and then just like spread those spores out and then have like that 4 damage climb without like sacrificing something else. That's like energy conversion is like, if you can just snapshot something, it's like the most efficient power strength buff, right? Yeah, that's probably going to be the way to go build for her, but I think I need another forma to do that build, so oh well. All right, thank you all for watching. If you liked this content, you want to see more like it, please like, comment, and subscribe. Maybe, you know, give me some comments, constructive criticism down below. Let me know what kind of videos you'd like to see from me next. And that's all for now. Yakri out.